Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: an international food charity suspends operations in Gaza following the death of 7 of its workers in an Israeli airstrike. Our other headlines: Iran says it'll retaliate following a suspected Israeli attack on its embassy in Damascus, which killed senior military commanders. Ukraine launches its deepest attacks into Russia's industrial heartland, striking the country's third largest oil refinery. And the first visitors arrive for the treasures of 2 palaces as France and China celebrate their shared love of art. An international food charity is suspending its operations in Gaza following the death of 7 of its workers in an Israeli airstrike. World Central Kitchen says they were part of an aid convoy that was leaving a warehouse. The victims were from Palestine, Australia, Poland, the UK and the United States. Israel's military has promised to investigate. Well, the airstrike has prompted widespread international criticism. The founder of World Central Kitchen called on the Israeli government to stop what he called indiscriminate killing and the blocking of humanitarian aid. The European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, is calling for an inquiry, along with China, the UK and Australia.
Shocked and saddened to hear the reported deaths of aid workers in Gaza. We need to be allowed to do that work unhindered, and it's incumbent on Israel to make sure that they can do that, and we're asking Israel to investigate what happened urgently, because clearly there are questions that need to be answered.
We want full accountability for this, because this is a tragedy that should never have occurred.
Well, World Central Kitchen is one of the main suppliers of desperately needed aid to Gaza. The organisation delivers food and prepares meals. Last month, it had served more than 42 million meals in the Palestinian enclave over 175 days. WCK was involved in the first shipment of aid to Gaza through a sea route from Cyprus in March. A second maritime aid shipment of 332 tons arrived in Gaza early this week. The organisation began operations in 2010 and has delivered food to communities hit by natural disasters, refugees at the United States border, healthcare workers during the pandemic, and to people in conflict zones in Ukraine and Gaza. Well, let's get the view now from Israel and talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier, who's in Tel Aviv. Alex, what more have we heard from Israel about this strike that killed 7 aid workers?
Well, Jamie, confirmation from Israel's Prime Minister that this was an Israeli strike, that this was what he described as a tragic case of our forces hitting innocent people in Gaza. We actually heard from the Prime Minister just over an hour ago, commenting, showing the seriousness of this tragedy, and let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic incident of an unintended strike by our forces on innocent people in the Gaza Strip. This happens in war. We are checking this thoroughly. We are in touch with the governments, and we will do everything for this not to happen again.
Well, clearly that message from Benjamin Netanyahu showing the seriousness of this incident where 7 aid workers have been killed. Now, we have a little bit more detail about what might have happened, reporting in Haaretz, the Israeli news source here, citing defense sources saying that this was a drone strike which fired 3 missiles at this World Central Kitchen convoy in succession, one after the other, hitting the first car, then the second, then the third, as those aid workers were trying to move from car to car as they were being struck. So clearly a serious tragedy that has happened. Now we've heard those calls for accountability from Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, from Rishi Sunak in the UK. A lot of questions still to answer. We've heard also from Daniel Hagari, the spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, expressing deep sorrow at this tragedy and saying that this will be investigated thoroughly and that everything will be done to avoid this happening again. We heard that also from Prime Minister Netanyahu. But, Jamie, it's not just the consequences for those aid workers and their families who will doubtless be devastated, but it will also have serious consequences on the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. As a result of this strike, World Central Kitchen has suspended all activity in Gaza. That includes the turning around of ships that were unloading food, turning around with 240 tons of food undelivered. So you still have the risk of starvation and famine in the Gaza Strip, and you currently have 240 tons of food sailing away from the Gaza Strip because World Central Kitchen deems it not safe enough for them to operate, especially as we know that this convoy was traveling on a route approved by the IDF. Jamie.
Alex, added impetus, as if it were needed, on those ceasefire talks. What is the latest you're hearing on that?
Well, we know that the Israeli delegation in Cairo has left or will leave this afternoon. That's according to the Prime Minister's office. They have offered a new proposal via the mediators, via Egypt, Qatar and the United States, that will now be considered by Hamas. Israeli officials in the last couple of days have said they are showing increased flexibility on one of the three main sticking points to a ceasefire deal being reached, and that is the return of civilians to northern Gaza. Israeli officials saying they're willing to allow more civilians to return to northern Gaza once hostages start being released. The deal on the table last time was 40 hostages, women, injured and elderly hostages, released in exchange for 700 Palestinian prisoners, including 100 serving life sentences for murder. That was rejected by Hamas, who said they wanted three other things: the return of civilians to northern Gaza, the full withdrawal of Israeli troops, and the full withdrawal of Israeli troops, as I just mentioned, and a longer-lasting ceasefire. Now, the withdrawal of troops and a longer ceasefire, not acceptable to Israel. They say they can move on the return of civilians to northern Gaza. Movement, but we'll have to wait a few days to see if that means progress. Jamie.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv. The president of Cyprus says the maritime corridor into Gaza will keep operating, and efforts to get food into the enclave must continue despite this deadly attack on the aid convoy. Let's talk to our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in Gaza's city of Rafah. Akram, what reaction there in Gaza to this attack?
Well, Gazans are shocked and saddened by the incident that took the lives of around 7 humanitarian aid workers. And the irony is that some people of Gaza, they are saying that they were killed as if they were Gazans, as if they were Palestinians. And by that, they were referring to the critical situation that people in Gaza and Palestine have been living for such a very long time, and that it took this killing of 7 innocent lives that are not Gazans for the world to act in a way that is somehow tense and in a way that asks for accountability and criminal investigations in some of the cases where Poland asked for criminal investigations. Gazans are saddened because of the fact that those people who were killed were also in Gaza and were providing aid for the people of Gaza. They were getting in touch with the people. They were overseeing the community kitchens that were developed and run by the World Central Kitchen. They were seeing the impact of the work that has been done. They have been seeing the meal almost in all Palestinian households for the last 175 days. And they were saddened that it took this very big loss to shake the consciousness of the world and to open the eyes of the different nations that are already opened by the public but not by the politician to the bitter fact on the ground and the death that has been going on. So sadness, shock, and also anger because of the ongoing killing and because of the way Israel has been dealing with the Gazans and with the international community.
Akram, these killings aside, the political process grinds on. The Palestinian Prime Minister has held his first cabinet meeting. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, indeed, the Palestinian cabinet, the newly appointed Palestinian cabinet convened, and they were talking about accountability. They were talking about also, they started by condemning a Shifa incident, the incident that already destroyed 800 beds, destroyed 100 dialysis machines, and also deprived the Gazans from 1/3 of the health services. the Prime Minister himself was saying that this is a crime and that there should be investigation, should be an accountability, and called for the world to look into the matter and to stop the ongoing massacring that is taking place by Israel in Gaza Strip, West Bank and East Jerusalem. And he was also trying to address some of the critique that was directed to the Palestinian government, where some of the people were accusing the Prime Minister himself by being a corrupt person because of some past events and past experiences and past news about himself being involved in corruption. He started by saying that this government is going to work hard for the sake of enhancing and bringing about accountability and free of corruption government. So people are hopeful, and he is, by those statements, trying to address some of the fears of the Palestinian community. Also, this issue of rebuilding Gaza and relief in Gaza. The government has one minister from Gaza that is assigned the job of the relief. It's called the Ministry of Relief, which is indicative of the fact that the Palestinian Authority is it has undivided attention to the relief effort in the Gaza Strip. So it's the first time he speaks to the media in his capacity as a prime minister. He understands there is a very long way to go, and he understands there is a very list of immediate duties to be done and fulfilled, and he is, by his statements, trying to assure the Palestinians and to make sure they understand that he's serious about tackling the issues of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Jamie.
Akram, thank you for that. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari in Rafah in Gaza. Iran says it'll retaliate following a suspected Israeli attack on its embassy in Damascus, which killed senior military commanders. The United Nations is holding an Emergency Security Council meeting to discuss this incident following a request by Russia. Our correspondent Esen Kavani reports.
The latest reaction in this regard is from the country's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. The leader warned on Tuesday morning that Iran will make the Israelis regret this latest crime and similar crimes. President Ebrahim Raisi also issued a statement describing the aggression as inhuman invasion and a clear violation of international regulations. He emphasized that, quote, the cowardly crime will not go unanswered. According to the Foreign Ministry, Tehran will later decide how and when to take retaliatory measures against Israel. Several countries, including China, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Oman, Iraq, and Russia, have condemned the Israeli aggression so far. Iran's Foreign Ministry says this attack is a gross violation of international regulations, emphasizing that necessary action should be taken against Israel.
Japan is resuming its funding of UNRWA, the United Nations humanitarian agency for Palestinian refugees. Its foreign minister says $35 million will now be transferred. This announcement follows a visit to Japan by the head of the agency last week. Earlier this year, Japan joined several Western allies in stopping funding, following allegations that some staff had links with Hamas. At least 27 people have been killed after a fire broke out during daytime renovation work at a nightclub in Istanbul. The venue is situated on the ground floor of a 16-story residential building in the Turkish city. The Justice Minister says an investigation is underway and 5 people have been detained. One child has been killed and 2 others seriously injured in a shooting at a school in Finland. A 12-year-old boy has been detained by the police after he fled the scene near the capital, Helsinki. Police said the boy used a handgun belonging to a relative. Gun ownership is common in Finland due to the popularity of hunting and target shooting. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Ukrainian drone attacks target an oil refinery and factory deep inside Russia. We're in Moscow. Next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. An international food charity suspends operations in Gaza following the death of 7 of its workers in an Israeli airstrike. Our other headlines: Iran says it'll retaliate following a suspected Israeli attack on its embassy in Damascus, which killed senior military commanders. Ukraine has launched its deepest attacks into Russian territory, hitting the country's 3rd largest oil refinery. Unmanned drones struck the Tartazan region more than 1,300 kilometers from the border. 13 people were injured in one of the strikes. The level of damage at the refinery is disputed by both sides. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernashova, watching events for us in Moscow. Dasha, what more do we know about this attack?
Well, we do know that one of the Ukrainian drones has managed to get as deep as 1,300 kilometers into the Russian territory in Tatarstan and has hit the dormitory where, according to the local officials, the youth, the minors, the students from Russia, from Central Asia, from India, from Latin America and Africa were sleeping at that time. 13 of them got injured, according to the latest information we have from the authorities. So we understand that once again, according to the Russian officials, the Ukrainian side has tried to attack the peaceful civilians. Now, this time, obviously, the students. Now, we also understand that the head of the Republic, Rustam Minnikhanov, has gotten to the site of what has happened. He has instructed people on the ground locally there to restore the accommodation for the students as soon as possible. He also traveled to another place that was attacked by another Ukrainian drone. This is in Nizhny Kamsk, where the industrial cluster has been targeted. The Russian officials do not name any casualties or technical damage to the site of this industrial cluster. They say that the technological process has not been interrupted. But at the same time, we understand that this is so far a very deep attack by the Ukrainian drones inside the Russian territory, and there are many questions among the Russian population, and now this time particularly those who live in Tatarstan, as to how the Ukrainian armed forces has managed to take their drones that deep into the Russian territory.
More details perhaps in the coming hours. Dasha, I want to ask you about Belarus, which has again been holding drills in its border regions.
That's right. We have learned from the Ministry of Defense of Belarus that 2 regions in Belarus, Gomel and Grodno regions, are holding the 3-day military drills. Those drills are taking place close to Ukraine as well as to the territory of the EU countries, Poland and Lithuania. Now, those drills have a goal of teaching and training the officers and the territorial defense troops to defend their respective regions and how to act in case of martial law is enacted. But keep in mind that Belarus was the territory from where some of the attacks of the Russian armed forces have taken place back in February 2022, when Russia started its special military operation in Ukraine. And the Belarusian Ministry of Defense insists that these drills are also starting on this very day because in 1996, the presidents of Belarus and Russia have signed the decree on the creation of the Union State of Russia and Belarus that also provides for the cooperation between Russia and Belarus in the military sphere.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. China says it's working with Mexican authorities to investigate the deaths of 8 Chinese nationals who drowned while apparently trying to reach the United States. There's been a sharp increase in the number of Chinese immigrants passing through Mexico in recent years. Our correspondent Frank Contreras reports.
The bodies of 8 Chinese immigrants were found on the Playa Vicente beach near the town of Juchitán in southern Oaxaca state. Their boat departed from the town of Tapachula near Guatemala on Thursday, according to media reports. 1 Chinese migrant survived. Mexican National Guard troops and government officials are investigating. The bodies of 7 Chinese women and 1 Chinese man were taken to the Zoar funeral home in the town of Zanatepec, Oaxaca, located about 95 kilometers from where they were found. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said it is monitoring the incident.
The Chinese embassy in Mexico is in close touch with the Mexican side to further verify the information of the deceased and provide assistance to the surviving Chinese national.
The number of Chinese immigrants passing through Mexico in recent years has been growing. Each year, tens of thousands of migrants travel through this part of southern Mexico. Many are from Latin America. Mexican immigration authorities say a growing number of undocumented immigrants are coming from Africa and Asia. China's embassy is in contact with Mexican authorities and has urged them to continue with their investigation into the incident. Frank Contreras, CGTN, Chiapas, Mexico.
Donald Trump has posted a $175 million bond in his civil fraud case, preventing New York state authorities from seizing his assets. The former U.S. president was originally ordered to pay over $400 million after being found guilty of fraudulently inflating property prices. The sum was reduced last week. While Trump appeals, he's denied any wrongdoing. The Port of Baltimore has opened a temporary shipping channel to free some of the ships trapped by last week's bridge collapse. Huge pieces of debris have been blocking access to the U.S. port, with the Dali cargo vessel still stuck underneath the bridge. Authorities say a second temporary channel will open in the coming days. Egypt's President Sisi has been sworn in for a 3rd term, extending his rule to the end of the decade. The former army chief has been in power since a military coup in 2013. He won an election in December with close to 90% of the vote, although he faced no serious challenges. China's largest bank will provide $41 billion to boost the country's tourism industry. The Industrial and Commercial Bank has signed a cooperation deal with the Culture and Tourism Ministry to try to stimulate investment and spending. China's tourism revenue reached nearly $680 billion in 2023. That's a year-on-year increase of more than 140%. A new exhibition, jointly held by China and France, is welcoming its first visitors in Beijing. It's based on the long relationship between the two countries, beginning around 300 to 400 years ago. Exhibits include a 17th century pocket watch thought to have been given to a Chinese emperor by Louis XIV. The event is being held at Beijing's Forbidden City, and it marks 60 years of diplomatic ties. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen, who's in Paris for us. Ross, what can we expect from this China-France Year of Culture and Tourism?
Well, this is one of the set-piece events of that year of Chinese-French tourism, Jamie, with some of the pieces that are going to China. Chinese porcelain vases acquired by Louis XVI in 1782, and certainly the 18th century was a time when the king and his foreign minister were particularly interested in China, which they saw as home to great civilizations, a developing market for business. Very interesting country at the time. They were trying to promote and develop that relationship between Paris and Beijing back then. And so we are seeing some of those treasures from the king's former royal palace from Versailles going to Beijing for this joint exhibition. It's the latest in one of many events that are being scheduled this year to try to develop the ties between the two. We saw in January the French tourism minister going to China. Also at the end of January, this concert that was held again in the Palace of Versailles with musicians coming from China to take part in that. There have been different events that have been scheduled, and we do know also at the highest level, according to China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs last year, following the visit by President Emmanuel Macron in April 2023, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs did say at the time that Mr. Macron, quote, expected and welcomed President Xi Jinping to visit France again next year. If that visit is to be confirmed, if it were to be taken up, that would be an expression of French-Chinese links at the very highest level.
Ross, thank you for that. Our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. The headlines again: an international food charity suspends its operations in Gaza following the deaths of 7 of its workers in an Israeli airstrike. Our other headlines: Iran says it'll retaliate following a suspected Israeli attack on its embassy in Damascus, which killed senior military commanders. And Ukraine launches its deepest attacks into Russia's industrial heartland, striking the country's 3rd largest oil refinery. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to Europe's weather forecast, starting with atmospheric circulation. Some low-pressure system will continue to impact many portions of the continent over the next few days, which will bring widespread and persistent rain and also slight temperature swings. Well, let's first look at what weather on Wednesday. The rain chances could be expected from Iberia Peninsula all the way to northwestern Russia. There could be also sleet and snowy conditions in parts of northern Europe. As we go into Thursday, there could be plenty of sunshine across much of Iberian Peninsula, but precipitation will continue to occur from the western Europe all the way to the east. But when it comes to maximum temperatures, the daily highs be around a freezing point across the north over the next 2 days. If you're living across the east, the daily highs will slide down a little bit. For central western Europe, the daily highs will remain in mid-teens, and back to Iberian Peninsula around 20 for daily highs. And your business and travel outlook: by Thursday, we're going to have the rain for London and Paris with daily highs in teens, down to Madrid, see 22 to 4, partly sunny sky. When it comes to Lisbon, overcast sky to be expected, 20 to 13, and eventually over to Central Europe, you could see the rain chances will be rather dominant. Please keep your umbrellas handy.